Why do we deal with so much PMS? Why do most of us deal with some flavor of PMS? How is there this evolutionary mismatch between that and maybe modern life?
Well, the answer to that is pretty complex. So the reason that women have PMS is really twofold, maybe threefold. So the first is the progestogenic phase of the cycle. So as we shift from, this really high energy, feeling really sexy, estrogen dominant phase of the cycle into the luteal phase, I mean, our body is literally shifting gears from head to toe. Right. So it's like we're becoming a different version of ourselves. And this is something that, it's like on the one hand, we recognize that hormones influence behavior, influence how we feel. But I don't think that we've really given it the importance culturally that it needs. And I think that we've tried to minimize the impact of women's sex hormones on the way that they think and feel and experience the world.
Oh, I think there's a pretty hard eye roll, even just around the term hormonal. And before you actually answer this, I just want to say men are also very hormonal as well. This is something that gives me a bit of an angry tick, where it's like, oh, she's hormonal. It's like, you know what? Your testosterone will go up if you see
a gun.
A gun. Okay.
Like you see an attractive person, you watch a movie where there's explosions, your testosterone goes up. You watch your sports team win, your testosterone goes up. Your sports team loses, your testosterone goes down. And so, men are 100% hormonal.
They are hormonal as well. So all of the evidence-based internet trolls that are like, there's no evidence for women changing over the menstrual cycle. Please listen to what Dr. Hill is about to say. So with that, yes.
Exactly. So, so men have one hormone and it changes dynamically based on the environment. Women have two that cycle just based on cues in the internal environment. And so it's like, in some ways, men's, testosterone is more reactive than our hormones. And so in some ways, men are the ones who are more fickle and capricious because their testosterone rises and falls based on things going on in the outside world in a way that women's does not. Now, women's does respond to things going on in the environment, but it's not as dynamic as testosterone, not by a mile. And, as women are shifting into the second half of the cycle, again, our body is shifting gears. Right. And so we're going to feel differently than how we feel during the first half of the cycle. And some of those things are things that we tend to think of as being less fun. Right. So just to give an example of this, one thing that happens in the brain during the luteal phase of the cycle is that our brain deliberately finds rewarding things less rewarding than it does outside of this phase of the cycle, right? So the idea of hanging out with your friends, for example, as you said, it seems less exciting, right? You don't really want to do it. You kind of want to stay home, right? And there's even been some really fun research with baboons showing that when female baboons are in the first half of the cycle, they're down and grooming one another and hanging out with the other females. And then when they go into their version of the luteal phase, they go and hide in a tree. And that's
I feel you, girl.
I know. It's so funny. I was reading that research. I'm like, yep, no, if I had a tree, that is 100% where I would be as well. But it's like, women, it's like the world, the outside world seems less exciting and stimulating. Like, and it's like we want to pull in. And that doesn't feel exciting. Right. And in fact, when things feel kind of subdued, that's a little, it feels kind of low key depressive, right? Where you're just kind of like, I don't want to go shopping. I don't want to see my friends, and you're kind of tired because one of the other things that happens during the second half of the cycle is when your body is releasing progesterone, is that progesterone gets broken down by the body. And one of the things that it releases is this really beautiful neurosteroid called allopregnanolone. Yeah. And it stimulates GABA receptors in the brain. And that just chills us out, but it makes us kind of sleepy, right? So we're kind of relaxed and we're kind of tired and nothing seems really exciting. And sex doesn't have the appeal that it used to have, except for as a means of connection. But just like sex is this sexy endeavor, doesn't seem as exciting to us. And you tend to see a little bit of a downturn in sexual desire. Women feel less sexy themselves because, again, sex won't lead to conception during this point. So it's like, natural selection is not rolling out the carpet and making us feel as sexy as we possibly could because it's costly and it's not necessary for reproduction anymore. And so you get some of these types of psychological changes that make us feel a little bit low key, blah. And so that's one answer, right? It's just that, our body is shifting gears. And because we've never been told that it's normal to shift gears from, the first half of the cycle to the second half of the cycle, right? We've all been taught that it's this pathology or this syndrome called PMS. Like we feel like there's something wrong with us. And this is all because there's, our idea of what it means to be human is based on a male ideal, right? And the male way of being is that there's one size fits all, right? Every day is the same day hormonally. And so for a man, a day is a day is a day, but that's just not true for women. Right. So part of the reason that we experience PMS is that we've never really had a language for the idea that there's two halves to our whole. The second part of the PMS experience is that it feels a whole lot worse for us than it needs to, because our lack of awareness about the fact that our body is shifting gears and that our body's needs change and that our physiology changes actually creates pathology. And just to give you an example of this, one of the things that research finds that happens when women shift into the luteal phase of the cycle is that their basal metabolic rate increases, right? Meaning that a person burns more calories during the day in the second half of the cycle than they do in the first half of the cycle. And the degree to which our basal metabolic rate increases is up to about 10 to 11%. Right. And that's significant. So if you eat like 2,000 calories a day, you're going to need an extra between 150 and 200 calories a day. That's a lot. Right. But we're all fed this one size fits all nutritional guidance, right? That's built on male physiology. And we're told you need to eat X number of calories a day. So what happens is a woman in the luteal phase is eating X number of calories a day because that's what she's been told is normal. And she's like, I'm hungry. I'm tired, and now I've got food cravings, right? And so we create this pathology because we're not actually listening to what our bodies need, right? And on top of that, then we tell ourselves a story about ourselves, right? Because we're feeling hungry, we're eating the number of calories we were told that we're supposed to eat, right? And we're feeling hungry and we're having food cravings. And then we end up, going to the pantry and, eating peanut butter out of the jar with a spoon. And then we start telling ourselves a story about how we don't have any self-control and how our body is the enemy. And why can't I just
failures?
Yeah, and we believe that. It's like we've been as women, we've been internalizing that message since the day we were born, practically, where it's like we're given this, wisdom or this like advice about what we're supposed to be doing to take care of ourselves that was never made with our bodies in mind. And then when our bodies misbehave, they're not misbehaving. They're reacting. They're reacting to following a set of rules that were never made for us. And so another part of PMS, in addition to the fact that there is some stuff that's happening that actually makes physiological adaptive sense, and it's actually part of our inherited wisdom that we've gotten from our ancestors. Another part of it is that we experience actual pathology that happens as a result of not giving our body what it needs during this time. And then the third thing that comes into play in terms of creating the experience of PMS is that these environmental mismatches that you talked about have created an experience where women aren't able to ride the wave of hormonal change with as much sort of grace and nimbleness as we used to be able to do. And the reason for this is that, a lot of the research seems to suggest that the major culprit in terms of women experiencing what we can consider severe PMS, so where they're just like feeling it all, right? They're just feeling deeply depressed or deeply anxious, and they're really bloated, and their breasts are sore, and and this and that and the other thing, and they can't sleep, and they're tired, and they feel like everybody hates them. A lot of this is the result of the lack of resilience of our cells in our brain and in the rest of the body to riding the waves of these hormonal changes. Because as our hormones change, it requires our bodies to be able to quickly adapt, right? When estrogen is rising and falling, and then when progesterone is rising and falling, it requires the body and the cells in the body to be able to quickly adjust. And one of the things that stands in the way of our body being able to quickly adjust to hormonal changes are things like inflammation, right? And cellular inflammation and, all of the things that we do that are not positive for our health, right? So not getting sunlight, not getting exercise, not eating a diet comprised of whole, nutritious foods, right? Not having social connection, right? Not getting enough sleep. All of these things erode our resilience to hormonal changes. And when we don't have that resilience to hormonal changes, when we go through, in particular, the big ups and downs of hormones that happen in the luteal phase, because they are big, even though that graph that we all see about what's happening hormonally across the cycle shows that the luteal phase increase in progesterone is just a little bit higher than the estrogen rise in the first half of the cycle. That isn't drawn to scale. And if you actually look at those things carefully, the axis on the right-hand side that's showing progesterone is at 10 times the amount relative to the x-axis showing the levels of estrogen. And so the amounts of progesterone rise and fall about 10 times more than levels of estrogen rise and fall during the first half of the cycle. And so, the hormonal changes that happen in the second half of the cycle are huge. And they require the body to be able to adapt really quickly. And when you don't have that flexibility, that cellular flexibility that allows you to be able to ride the wave of hormonal change, it makes us feel anxious. It makes us feel tired. It can make us more bloated than we need to be, because it can lead to, dysregulation in mineral levels and, all kinds of things that aren't necessarily positive for our bodies.
As you were saying, inflammation, when we are getting appropriate sunlight and diet and exercise and social and sleep, these are all things that I think most women struggle with in the luteal phase. And I think the more, if I hear what you're saying correctly, which I'm completely in accordance with, the luteal phase is a feature. It's not a bug. It's not something that we have to fix. Whereas I think a lot of especially on social media, we see a lot of individuals who will say, they're usually men, but there are some women as well who will say things like, it's only your calories that matter. Your menstrual cycle plays absolutely no role in your mood, in your ability to push at the gym. And you just have to, if you're feeling crappy, you just have to push through it. And I used to do that. I used to white knuckle my way through the luteal. I was like, no, I gotta eat the same, like the calories, not like, I don't care. It's like it's like hear no evil, see no. I was like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear that I have to increase my nutritional intake of calories, because that feels really scary for me. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm not alone in that, where I think a lot of women maybe feel to some degree that it's like, oh, it's just, it's just 10%. It's just like 150 calories. Like I can just, if I just don't eat that, then I'll just be in a greater caloric deficit, right? And then you end up, like you were saying, rocking on the floor in the corner somewhere because you just had 2 jars of peanut butter and you had it fit faster than you could even realize what you were doing.
Right.